Welcome everyone to our Tuesday, April 26, 2022 regular closed session meeting of the East Bay MUD Board of Directors. Can we have roll call, please?
Director Coleman.
Present.
Director Katz. Director McIntosh. Here. Director Mellon.
Present.
Director Patterson.
Present.
Director Young.
Yep.
President Linney.
Here. All right, thank you. If we're now at public comment, and if members of the public are online and wish to make public comment, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. When prompted, please state your name, affiliation if applicable, and topic. Please refrain from providing personal information such as addresses or phone numbers during public comment. If we need this information, we will have you contact staff. The secretary will call each speaker in the order received. Each speaker is allocated 3 minutes to speak. However, I have the discretion to amend this time based on the number of speakers. Secretary will track time and inform each speaker when the allotted time is concluded. Secretary, do we have anybody who...
I'm waiting. I don't see any hands for public comment. And I have one.
Okay.
Gonna unmute the mic. Yvette Rivera, you should be able to unmute your mic. And your 3 minutes will start now.
Thank you, Risha. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. A couple of weeks ago, I came, so just to let you know for the record, I am going to be talking about the Melanie Woodrow Channel 7 news story titled East Bay Mud Discrimination Lawsuit. I rewatched that news story recently, and of course, I was listening to the district's boilerplate response to really usually anything negative about the workplace culture at East Bay MUD. And I went on to hear the district's position. At the end of the video, they said the legal claims are unfounded, that the district felt that the legal claims presented by Saji Pierce and Ariel Bland were unfounded. You know, I went back and looked at the video from August 10th, 2021, where Director Linney, after I read parts of the Ariel Bland, Saji Pierce lawsuit against Craig Spencer, Laura Costa, and East Bay MUD. And I listened to Director Linney's comments from that day on August 10th. And on that day, he said, and I'm quoting, "The district has thoroughly reviewed the facts and believes the allegations are unfounded." And that's end quotes. And that's really different from what the newscast played on April the 4th. On April the 4th, the district's position was the legal claims are unfounded. So when Director Linney spoke on August 10th, I'm assuming it came through General Counsel's office, Derek McDonald. I'm just wondering what they believed in terms of the allegations were unfounded. Was it the report that determined that Craig Spencer engaged in racial bias, but that he did not violate any district policies? Was that unfounded? Or the allegations of fact from Saji Pierce and Ariel Bland, where a white attorney, Anna Gunderson, received favorable treatment? Was that unfounded? I don't know. But I'm really glad that the trial is going to happen in March 2023. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Pamela Price's law firm is going to do with this case. That's all I have. Thank you. I yield.
All right, any other speakers?
There are no other speakers for public comment.
All right, we will now convene to discuss closed item agenda items. We are scheduled to return for regular meeting at 1:15 p.m. Everyone, to our regular business meeting of Tuesday, April 26th, 2022. We will receive reports from this morning's Sustainability, Energy, and Finance Administration Committee meetings, as well as the April 13th Los Vaqueros JPA, the April 14th Freeport Regional Water Authority, and April 22nd Upper Mokelumne River Water Authority meetings under item 15. Roll call, please, Madam Secretary.
Director Coleman,
Present.
Director Katz, Director McIntosh, Director Mellon,
Present.
Director Patterson, Director Young, President Lenny.
Here. So please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, at this time, it is my pleasure to take some time to acknowledge Secretary of the District, Risha Cole, for 25 years of service. Risha started her career as the director at the district in April 1997 and has worked in various administrative capacities almost exhaustively. I'm sorry, it says exclusively. In the general manager's department. She has served as secretary for the past 5 years, and I can say exhaustively for that, certainly. Please join me in congratulating Risha for 25 years.
Do we have a picture taken? Wait a minute, yeah, we do.
Take a picture.
Dave is.
Record this. I thought we were still on the Pledge of Allegiance.
Sorry to lean into this much. I like you, but not that much.
No, John, it's always suspected.
This is fun. Congratulations.
Yay, Risha.
Okay, I have a report from closed session. The board in closed session this morning, by unanimous vote of the directors attending, authorized the general counsel to initiate litigation in one matter. The action, defendants, and other particulars will be disclosed upon inquiry once the action is formally commenced. There are no other announcements from closed session. We are now on to public comment. If members of the public are online and wish to speak on an agenda or non-agenda items, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. If you're making a comment on a non-agenda item, you'll be heard now at the beginning of the meeting. If there are comments on agenda items, will be heard at that time that the item is up for consideration. When prompted, please state your name, affiliation if applicable, and topic. Please refrain from providing personal information such as addresses or phone numbers during the public comment. If we need this information, we'll have you contact staff. The secretary will call each speaker in the order received. Each speaker is allotted 3 minutes to speak. However, I have the discretion to amend this time based on the number of speakers. The secretary will track time and inform each speaker when the allotted time has concluded. I have 2 speaker cards, both of them for public forum right now. So I'll call Yvette Rivera. Yvette here. She needs a minute. Okay. Joey Smith.
All right, thank you. What a beautiful sight. Haven't seen you all here together in such a long time. My name is Joey Smith. I am the president of Local 2019 currently. And this week makes the 70th anniversary of Professional Secretaries Administration Week. And tomorrow will be the 70th Professional Administration's Day. All got started back in 1952. The name changed a few different times. Our clerical units and our accountants and several other jobs that might not on the surface appear to be administrative fall under my local. And it is so important that we each take a moment, just like we've honored Risha today for her 25 years of service, being the #1 admin person here at East Bay MUD. We need to remember, at the very least, those who help to make our jobs easier because they do their jobs so well. I've never been hired at East Bay MUD as an admin person, but the 2 unfortunate times that I had job injuries, I was in the office and I was helping them. And they would ask me, "You really don't want to go back out there in the field, do you? You want to stay here and help us, right?" They said, "You do it so well." I said, "Well, I have the experience with that, but it's not my lane. I'm glad to help where I can." I want to put a great big shout out to all of my 2019 admins and everyone else, and I hope that everyone who's in a position of authority will take the time to acknowledge their admin support as well. Thank you for your time.
Well said.
As Joey's walking away, all I can say is thank goodness for the admin, for at least in my case, because I'm often asking for stuff and they have it.
Thanks, John.
They all make us look better than we really are.
All right. Do we have other speakers? Is Yvette here? Oh, okay.
Thank you. I apologize for stepping up for a second. Thank you for this time. I'm going to videotape again. Part of the reason I'm videotaping is to give people that don't know how to come to board meetings, just an example of what it's like. So today I'm going to again review the Melanie Williams Channel 7 story titled East Bay Mud Discrimination Lawsuit. I rewatched the news story recently, and of course the portion where it mentioned that Craig Spencer engaged in racial bias, and the part where the district once again tried to shield itself from culpability by saying that they were engaged in helping employees. When I got to the part where the district said that it believed that the legal claims of Saji Pierce and Ariel Bland were unfounded, I mentioned this morning that it was the first time I heard that, because on August the 10th, 2021, Director Linney said that the district believed that they had thoroughly reviewed the facts and believed the allegations were unfounded. I'm not sure what facts they thought were unfounded, but the report mentioned that Craig Spencer engaged in racial bias and he didn't violate any district policies. I'm not exactly sure what Saji Pierce's tort complaint or Ariel Bland's tort complaint under factual allegations could have been unfounded. That a white attorney, Anna Gunderson, a white female attorney, received preferential treatment, or that Laura Brunson Acosta or Craig Spencer disparaging Ariel Bland. These are allegations in the lawsuit, and disparaged Saji Pierce. I know this lawsuit's going to end up happening in March 2023, and that it's going to be defended or presented by a very well-known civil rights attorney. I'm not sure if this district, if the board members are actually reading the reports that resulted in the investigation, but this lawsuit is going to end up being your legacy. And I hope that you thoroughly review the facts before you make any more statements about the allegations being unfounded. That's all I have. I yield.
All right, do we have anyone on the phone lines?
No one on the line for public comment? We have one, give me a moment, we have one hand. We have S. Burns. And they just,
What name did you say?
it said S. Burns, but the person just put their hand down.
Okay,
Okay. So I have no hands for public comment
All
on
right.
Zoom.
thank you then. We will now move on to the consent calendar, items 1 through 8. Are there items to be pulled for the consent calendar for discussion, Frank?
Number 4, please.
For any other ones? Okay, do we have a motion for the rest of them?
I'll move 1 through 3, 5 through 8.
All right, moved by Coleman, seconded by Marguerite. That's right, we don't need a roll call vote. I will now ask for a vote of aye. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we're on to item 4 then, for,
Before the general manager, I want you all to hear the question that I had raised. And that is, because of pipe that is coming from other places, I was especially concerned that this pipe might be coming from China. And there have been problems with clients of mine over the years where a product starts out really nice, and then all of a sudden, once it's met the first approvals, it becomes a problem. General managers advised me that this product is coming from South Korea for the most part. And the one thing that I've raised, and this is why I'm trying to cut down on the amount of time, Clifford, is it's fine that it's coming from Korea. I have a lot more confidence than China. But I still want to know, based on the report that we got, we're approving it via the specs we've received versus someone actually doing an inspection. And that's what I would like to get some more information on.
So let me try to answer at least a part of it. So the pipe itself is going to be manufactured mostly in South Korea. Some of it may be domestically supplied. But then the epoxy lining and the plastic wrap, that's going to be done in Southern California. And district staff will be inspecting, they'll be at the plant inspecting that pipe before we receive it.
Yeah, that part I was very comfortable with, that our staff would be looking at it. But it used to be, didn't we send pipe to Cornell or someplace to test its strength?
The shipment to Cornell, that was for testing some of the earthquake-resistant ductile pipe as well as some of the plastic pipe. These were new materials that we wanted to test, and now that testing facility is moving over to UC Berkeley, which is getting set up right now. But we don't test all pipe. Most of the pipe that we use don't get tested weren't tested at the Cornell facility.
This is a pretty large order, though.
We buy lots of pipe. Just relatively speaking, when you look at the number of miles of pipe we put in, that this is, I mean, it's a lot, but it's not close to the amount of pipe that we have.
Anyway, I'd be willing to hear what Jimmy can enlighten.
Jimmy, you have anything else you'll add?
Yes, and I just a slight correction, Clifford. The material, the raw material, the steel is coming from South Korea. It will actually be fabricated and rolled into pipe in the U.S. at the plant in Southern California.
So it's sheet material that's being rolled?
It comes in rolls or sheets, and that gets formed into the pipe. But that will occur at the manufacturer's facility in Southern California. But what I do want to say, even we have procured this particular type of pipe on four different occasions prior to this. We have gone through the same process, and we are very comfortable that the material is good. It conforms to an ASTM standard, which is why we In other cases where we actually write the different specifications for our pipe, we'll send our inspectors down there. But this is standard pipe that all agencies use, conforming to a standard, and so we're fairly comfortable with that. But when our inspectors do go down to inspect the lining and coating process, they will do a visual inspection of the pipe before it's lined and coated. They'll take pictures, they'll check the insides of the pipe, they'll take some thickness measurements just to make sure that it is okay. So that's the approach that we have been taking. We feel very comfortable with that. And like I said, this particular type of pipe, we've purchased on 4 separate occasions before this.
I find what you're saying very reassuring, and I'm willing to move the item forward.
Do I have a second? All right, motion by Frank, seconded by Bill. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Thank you, Jimmy.
All right, passes unanimously. We are now on to determination and discussion. And General Manager Clifford Chan will introduce each item.
So first, we have 2 actions related to the issuance of water and wastewater revenue bonds to support our capital improvement program. This item was discussed this morning at the Finance Administration Committee, and the committee unanimously supported the staff's recommendation. We have Robbie Haney, our Treasury Manager, to provide a brief presentation prior to board discussion.
Okay. Good afternoon, members of the board. So these 2 items are the reason why your packet is over 500 pages, so sorry about that. But one is to authorize the issuance of water system revenue bonds, and the second is to authorize the issuance of wastewater system revenue bonds. Yeah, and this was presented this morning at the Finance Admin Committee meeting. So between now and the end of the fiscal year, we're planning to issue both water revenue bonds and wastewater revenue bonds. On the water side, we plan to issue up to $400 million to pay for capital projects, to refund existing bonds, to lower our debt service costs, and to potentially do a de-risking to reduce our swap exposure and our variable rate exposure. On the wastewater side, we're planning to issue up to $45 million to pay for capital projects and to refund bonds for debt service savings similar to the water system. And I'll talk about each of these briefly in the next few slides. So first off is the new money. Both the water and wastewater system new money bonds will be issued as green bonds. That's the 4th time that we've issued green bonds for the water system, and it'll be the first time we've done this for the wastewater system. And since these are green bonds, we plan to use the proceeds for environmentally beneficial projects. And to choose those projects, we're applying the guidance for issuing green bonds that was adopted by the board last month. So it's the updated guidance, updated last month. And then now 2 of the series of bonds that we're issuing are being used to refinance existing debt for debt service savings. On the water side, we're refunding $82 million of the Series 2012A bonds. And right now we're estimating a present value savings of 22% of the refunded par amount. And on the wastewater side, we're refunding $20 million of our Series 2012A wastewater bonds. And there, the present value savings is currently estimated at 21% of the refunded par amount. So basically, both of these refundings are intended to lower our debt service costs, which is a good thing. The final piece of our debt issuance plan is a water de-risking piece. We're hoping to refund our $105 million variable rate debt and terminate the associated interest rate swaps. That would, in general, reduce risk to the district, but it would also eliminate our last remaining swaps before the sunset of LIBOR in 2023. We'll only issue these if the results are cost neutral, and the definition of cost neutral is up on the slide. We've done these de-riskings in the past, and that's how we've gotten from having quite a bit of variable rate debt and quite a few swaps down to a pretty manageable amount at $105 million. If we can get this done, if the interest rates work out and we're able to do this de-risking, it would be our last one. So it would be our last variable rate revenue bonds and the last of our swaps. So we're hoping we can do that. So as I said, there's 2 actions here, one for each system. The first is to authorize the issuance of the water system revenue bonds and approve the related bond documents that made the packet so big because they're included in there. And then just going to the next slide, the second action is to authorize and approve the issuance of the wastewater system revenue bonds and approve the associated documents with that. Both would be sold through a negotiated sale. And so that's a brief overview. There's a number of moving pieces with this transaction. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, any questions from board members? All right, I will consider a motion for both items.
I'll move the items.
All right, motion by Director Coleman, seconded by Director Patterson. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Great presentation.
Thank you, Robbie. So for our next item, we're going to present our annual water supply and availability and deficiency report. As we've been sharing with the board since January, rainfall has been below average. This report evaluates the adequacy of our water supply and provides the basis for any board action to consider things like demand management or additional supplemental supply actions. Mike Tognolini, our Director of Water and Natural Resources, will make the presentation.
Good afternoon, President Linney and members of the board. Presenting today the 2022 Water Supply Availability and Deficiency Report. Do I control? Okay. So the Water Supply Availability and Deficiency Report provides an update on our current water supply status and rainfall projections, discusses applicable regulations and obligations, and makes a determination of whether there is sufficient supply for customer demands in 2022. And these charts look familiar to you, I'm sure. This is our current water supply, McKelvey precipitation. This is through the early part of last week and does not reflect the storm that came at the end of last week, which actually bumped our April precipitation up above average. We're just slightly above 4 inches of rain, 4.89 as of last count. So we've actually been even a little above average for April. But as you can see, as the board knows, while we had a very wet October and December, and what looks like now an average April, the rest of the months have been extremely dry, and in fact, January through March were the driest on record. Similar chart for the East Bay. In the East Bay, again, we received rainfall at the end of the week last week that pushed us up toward approximately average precipitation for the month of April. But again, the same pattern, wet in October and December, very dry the rest of the months except for now an average April.
Mike, I have a question. Back on the McCollum precipitation. I just taking a closer look at this. October, obviously, we blew it out of the water, so to speak. But if I were to take the top part of the chart on both December and October, is that water or that precipitation captured more or less? I mean, if you were to take that and move it over into the empty calendar months, it doesn't look so bad that way. But is that water captured? Is that a fair thing to try and even do or think about?
I think it's generally a fair assumption to make. And you can see at the top of this chart, through April 19th, we were at 80% of average for the year. So, but to your question, early rainfall precipitation is not as beneficial as late precipitation, generally because there's more time for evaporation, more time for water to percolate into the soil, et cetera. So you might lose a little bit more earlier in the season, but in general, you look at the overall annual precipitation over the course of the entire year.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
But yeah, to go to Doug's question, Mike, last year we lost, I think, 75,000 acre feet in anticipated runoff because it had been so dry in the watershed. So you're saying that the runoff, that we're not expecting to have that kind of loss from evapotranspiration or in the case of going into the groundwater basin?
So we have, we've modified our models to better account for the moisture content and losses that occurred last year. And so we don't anticipate the same level of loss occurring. We've also had this late April rain, which will have an effect. Okay, moving on to snowpack. Snow depth at Caples Lake. The 2022 is the red line on this chart and doesn't reflect that we got a little bit more snow at Caples Lake, but not that much more to really make a substantial difference.
How much
and
is
if I-
not, how much is a little?
Uh,
If you were to
we're currently, I'm going to
extrapolate
show
it.
you on the next page here.
Oh, okay.
Caples Lake snow depth, early last week was at 9 inches cumulative precip. It's now at 14 inches. And snow water content went from 3.61 up to 5.58 inches. So in terms of percent of average, rather than 16% snow depth, we're now at 26%. And snow water content, instead of 14%, is now at 22%. So it was a bump, but it wasn't a game changer.
Okay.
All right, reservoir storage. I think the takeaway from this chart is that while generally we're close to average in the East Bay and Pardee, it's our Comanche Reservoir that is far below our typical levels for this time of year. So in terms of water supply projections, this is a chart of the driest January through June precipitation years on record for East Bay Mud. And as has been shared previously, 2022 has been the driest. And in fact, now this chart again was prepared prior to the rainfall last week. But even with the end of last week's precipitation, we're still on course to have the driest January through June on record in 2022. All right, precipitation to date, again, from middle of last week was at about 35.17. That number now is up to 37.34 inches. So we've kind of tracked a little bit on the green line in the last month here, but generally speaking, as you look at, as we get toward the end of the season, of course, the difference between the 10% exceedance and the 99% exceedance gets very small and converge on a single number, and you can see where we're headed. We're now at 37 inches. We don't expect a lot more rain for the rest of the year. All right, our water supply projections. So this, Director Coleman, was to your question about whether we considered last year's effect, but this chart is updated. Excuse me, it is not updated. This is the chart as of middle of last week, which again shows a 50% median hydrology getting us to 500,000 acre feet at the end of September, 90% at 465, and a 99% exceedance hydrology at 445. And this took in the forecast rainfall for the end of last week. Well, it turned out we got a little bit more than we expected. So the good news is that our new projections, at least for the 90 and 99% exceedance hydrologies, have improved. So our 90% exceedance hydrology instead of 465 is now at 480. And our 99% exceedance hydrology instead of 445 is now at 465. So about a 20,000 acre foot increase in those dry scenario projections. Water supply outlook for 2022. These projections are based on, as required, are based in determining our joint settlement agreement year type, are based on the April 1st DWR snow survey. And they reflect a projected runoff of 440,000 acre feet, which is well below the average runoff of 745 TAF. And that corresponds to a JSA year type for April through September of dry.
What are the other scales that it could be? Like extremely dry or something like that, or?
Yeah, so critically dry would be the lowest, and I believe that number is 390. 300, okay. Yeah, so critically dry would be 300 or below. All right. Okay, flow release obligations. These are based on the runoff projections. Our JSA dry flow schedule is for releases from Comanche Reservoir to meet those commitments, excuse me, Woodbridge Irrigation District may receive full base supply of 60,000 acre feet. Jackson Valley Irrigation District may receive up to full maximum entitlement of 3,850 acre feet. North San Joaquin Water Conservation District will not receive any water, and surplus water will not be available based upon the current projections.
So, Mike, when we make the releases to Woodbridge and Jackson Valley, is that based on the numbers today, last week, or future date?
That is, in this case, based on all three. There is not enough expected variation in the remaining rainfall year to change the projection. It's been 60,000. It continues to be 60,000 for Woodbridge as a dry year.
Thank you.
Okay. And so the recommendation for this action is to file the water supply availability and deficiency report for 2022, and to declare the district's water supply is not sufficient for meeting customer demands with sufficient end-of-year storage after meeting flow obligations on the McKellamie River. That's it.
Any other questions from board members?
I would move the item.
All right. Moved by Director McIntosh, seconded by Director Patterson.
I just have a quick question, if I could, on page 538. We're talking, Mike, again, of water potentially at 480,000 acre feet or 465,000 acre feet at the end of the September 30th deadline.
So that's under the 90% exceedance hydrology. Under the 90% exceedance hydrology, we would be at 480 based on the most recent projection.
So I'm looking at figure 1, page 538, and I'm trying to expand it here with my fingers. Sorry. There we go. So just in terms of stages of droughts here, I know we're in a critical situation. I'm not denying that. But can you put that up? So I am having a
So
hard.
I think we're going to get into that
Okay.
as a part of the next
Okay.
item 12 on the agenda.
Okay.
If that's
Okay.
okay.
All right, so we are voting on filing the 2022 Water Supply Availability and Deficiency Report. Let's have a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. All right, we will now proceed to item 11 and conduct a public hearing on the proposed actions listed under items 12.1 through 12.5, which include the declaration of a water shortage emergency, adoption of Section 28 of the district's regulations governing water service to customers, declaration of a Stage 2 drought, and a mandatory district-wide water use reduction goal of 15%, affirming immediate implementation of the excessive water use penalty ordinance, and directing the preparation of a water shortage emergency action plan. The hearing is now open.
So based on our prior report that our water supply is deficient, we have those 5 actions that you just discussed for the board to consider. And we have Mike Tognolini and Alice Tui who will present on each of these actions. We'd like to go through the entire presentation prior to any board discussion.
Okay, back again. So as the general manager mentioned, we're going to walk through the drought response actions that are recommended for today. There are 5 steps to be covered in one board action, and Alice Tui and I will walk through them one by one. There we go. So the first part of the action would be to declare a water shortage emergency, and per the water code, an agency can declare that a water shortage emergency when the demands and requirements of water consumers cannot be satisfied without depleting the water supply of the distributor. Persistent dry conditions and reduced supplemental supplies justify that declaration of a water shortage emergency. And it also this water shortage emergency declaration provides basis for the subsequent actions as a part of this item number 12. Second recommended action is to declare a stage 2 drought with a 10% mandatory water use reduction goal. And important for the board to note that this is different than the recommended action that's actually in your board packets. So based on the late precipitation, which exceeded the expectations last week in terms of the amount of increase in water supply that would occur, staff is now recommending a 10% mandatory water use reduction goal. The board absolutely has a discretion to discuss and decide whether 15 is still more appropriate, but in the event that board decides to proceed with a 10% reduction goal, that would require specifying in your board action that you're going to take a 10% reduction instead of 15 if that is the way the board decides to go. Move on.
Do we have the discretion, I assume, to go somewhere in between if we wanted to?
Absolutely,
Yes.
yes. All right, this is a chart you're familiar with, the Drought Management Program Guidelines. And as we've discussed before, this is based on simply these are guidelines based on average condition, typical conditions during these dry years, with storage triggers that then correspond to a drought stage declaration, use of supplemental supply, and customer demand reductions. And those assumptions about how much supplemental supply we can obtain are inherent in the structure of this diagram. So if we're not able to obtain as much supplemental supply as we may have planned, it's worth consideration to declare to consider a different drought stage as a result. So these guidelines were really designed to manage multiple consecutive drought years. So you're not just looking at the current year, but what's going to happen next year as well. And it's, as I said, based on an assumption of supplemental supplies, and they are guidelines, so the board should consider whether or not to adjust to specific drought conditions. And we're going to talk a little bit about what some of the unique considerations are this year. And just for reference, the projected storage under a 99% hydrology, exceedance hydrology, is 465, which according to this chart would put us into stage 1.
So that's what I was asking, was this graph in item 10.
Mm-hmm.
So according to this, I'm just asking, it would be, you're looking at now 10% versus 15 because of this significant increase last week, or the increase. And that's a stage 1 category. Can a stage 1 be made mandatory at 10%?
So we're actually proposing the board consider a stage 2 significant drought mandatory 10 to 15%. And in this case, we're recommending 10, and the board can have a discussion about whether that's appropriate.
So going back to the previous discussion, we were talking about my notes are someplace here, I have to go back. It's 465 to 480, which is significantly more than what the parameters are on the left-hand side of the screen.
Right.
Now, I understand we're in a severe drought. Yes, I understand that. We don't know what's going to be coming next year. I understand that. But I'm also, and because quite frankly, this agency has done a very good job compared to a lot of agencies by diversifying its water supply, ability to procure new water. Granted, some of the water we thought we'd get this year is not going to happen because of the state. We understand that. I guess my concern is what somebody who reads into this, they're going to say, well, why are you going that far when your actual storage capabilities are going to be significantly more than what your stage 1 or 2 are?
Yeah, and I think, well, there's a few things. We have the next slide will explain this some more about how the guidelines were developed and the assumptions that went into the triggers. and how a lot of those assumptions aren't true. So that's number one. I think the second part is when we look at, whether you look at median or 90 or 99, we look out of what we expect. So besides the rain that we got last week, the forecast is dry and the long range forecast is below normal. So the reality of what we're going to get in the next 2 months, by the end of June, is probably something closer to the 99%, which is still 465.
Right.
And I will let Mike walk through this slide to explain, while the guidelines have some triggers, it has behind it assumptions that aren't true anymore. And maybe Mike, you can go into that some more of why there's some flexibility there.
Okay, so as was mentioned, the projected total system storage is for the 99% exceedance, which appears to be the path we're tracking now, looking at the next 2-week forecast, is now 465, up last week from 445. However, we also want to be sure we consider, as Clifford mentioned, that behind those guidelines are some assumptions about how much supplemental supply we're going to be able to get. And in the second year of a drought, in conditions such as these, the expectation in that chart is that we would get about 63,000 acre-feet of supplemental supply, according to the Drought Management Program guidelines. This year, it looks like we'll only be able to secure approximately 30,000 acre-feet of additional supplies. So that's a 33,000 acre-foot difference right there. So that's a factor to consider when we talk about drought stages. Not only is 2022 looking this way, but the expectation, based on what's happening around the state, is that 2023 will also see very limited supplemental supply, very possibly, again, if the drought continues, no CVP supplies and limited transfer supplies available as well. I mentioned there's a statewide drought crisis. If you look at reservoirs throughout the state, some of the largest reservoirs in the state, they are at extremely low levels, below 40% of average storage in some of our largest reservoirs, including Shasta and Oroville and others. And the Bay Area, many Bay Area agencies are also responding to the drought in the same way, in terms of asking for customer demand reductions, as well as those that have access trying to secure additional supplies. Also, another factor is that so far we have not been achieving our conservation targets. The board had asked for 10% voluntary reductions, and if you look at where we stand from July 1st of last year until now, we're at about 6%. So we've fallen a little bit short there. And summer is the best window to reduce demand. So taking an action now provides the best opportunity to reduce demands during the irrigation season. So with all of those considerations, as I mentioned, staff is recommending a stage 2 drought declaration with 10% mandatory water use reductions.
So I have a further question. So in our 465,000 acre-feet with 99% exceedancy dry, that is including the already knowing the amount of water transfers we're going to get, correct?
No, does not include the water transfers for this year.
Which we know will be 30 to 35,000 acre-feet?
Correct.
But the model's based on 63. Right?
No.
Yeah,
but
so-
I'm
so-
not talking the model, I'm talking what's actually going to be forecasted to be in storage, because we're being told it's 465,000 to 480,000 acre-feet, depending on what happens the next 2 months.
So the guidelines don't account for the supplemental supply until the next year, but that is baked into the overall modeling.
Okay.
So although it's not part of the projection, the 465, it is baked into what action the board would consider next year, and that's why the trigger levels for storage have been set the way they are.
The other question, I know that we're only achieving a 6% reduction overall water usage demand when we're asking for 10. I don't know if we're going to see it because I haven't looked ahead in the slides or anything. At the last meeting, it showed each of the categories, I think in the general manager's report, of the categories. We had municipal, industrial, single-family home, multifamily home, all that sort of stuff. And the only area that we actually had an increase in water usage was industrial. I think of 10%, if I recall correctly. And the one that had the biggest reduction was single-family homes, if I recall correctly. Do you have those updated numbers?
I don't know if it's part of the presentation. Those numbers are about right, though, yes.
Those are about right. So we only have one we only have one class of water customer that's actually exceeding, not even achieving the goal. And I think we're supposed to get a memo as to why we thought the industrial was up. I asked for that. I don't remember seeing it, but maybe I did get it.
Yeah, it hasn't been prepared. You had asked for a 5-year trend.
Yeah. So that's just as part of the equation of what I'm looking at. Is doing this. I don't deny we're in a critical situation. We are. We need to conserve more. We do. It's how we do it equitably, so no one customer class is being put at a burden, both financial burden and otherwise. But everybody should be saving water, period, regardless of what class they're in.
What's the number for the single family?
It was down, if I recall, 8%. And that was the biggest reduction of any customer class, if I recall, from the report 2 weeks ago. And the only one that was up was industrial by about 10%.
That's overall production, which is not necessarily about whether they're conserving water or not. I mean, that's why we need those.
Yeah, it's overall, and I think the other thing to consider is, I mean, I think we said this before, I'll say it a little differently. You know, the plan, the guidelines were developed assuming we get 63,000 acre feet. We're going to get more than likely 30,000 acre feet, which puts us more or less 35,000 acre feet shy. So if you think of that threshold at 425, you know, really, if we don't get the water, that threshold becomes higher. The other thing to consider too is built into the plan, it also assumed, in addition to the 63,000 acre feet, it assumed that our customers gave us 13% conservation to get to that point. So it didn't assume that our customers wouldn't cut back. It assumed we would get additional supplemental supplies and our customers will give us an additional 13% conservation in development of these triggers.
Sorry for dominating with questions.
Happy to answer them as best I can. Okay, so just to conclude for this second item, the drought management program guidelines at a stage 2, if the board were inclined to agree and declare a stage 2 drought emergency, the guidelines already allow for flexibility in considering mandatory conservation somewhere between 10 and 15%. I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alice Toohey for section 28.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, President Linney and members of the board. So the next 3 actions that I'm going to be talking about are the measures that we are recommending that would help us to get to significant water conservation savings in this drought. And the first of those actions is the adoption of Section 28, which is water use during water shortage emergency condition. Now, our board might recall we have Section 29 of our regulations governing water service. That's Section 29 is our water waste regulation. That is in place at all times. Section 28 would be in addition to that. So that sets restrictions on water use during water shortage emergencies. It includes enforcement actions. It was last in place during the previous drought from 2014 to 2016. So the Section 28 that's in your packet is specific to this drought. It includes a number of restrictions that I'm going to go through in a minute, but I did want to let the board know that that can be updated. So for example, if in the future the state comes out with additional restrictions, or if the drought gets more severe, we could update this at that time. So the first set of restrictions that are included in Section 28 have to do with irrigation. Reducing summer water use, irrigation water use is one of the main ways that we meet our drought goals during a drought. The first thing that we're recommending, perhaps the most significant, is a restriction on water use so that customers wouldn't be allowed to irrigate more than 3 times a week. We would also be asking customers to only irrigate before 9 a.m. and after 6 p.m. to prevent evaporation, and not to irrigate within 48 hours of measurable rainfall, and no irrigation that causes runoff. And I do want to mention, you might recall that the governor had an executive order last fall that led to some new emergency conservation regulations at the state level that went into effect in January. So everything that we've got in here is consistent with that, and then we have a few additional restrictions.
Alice, what is considered measurable rainfall?
I believe it's defined in the in section 28 as 1/4 inch.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, that's consistent. We just kind of followed the state regulations on that, just to be consistent. We do have some additional water use restrictions outside of irrigation. Again, we think that these are common sense measures to help us save water. No filling decorative fountains or ponds that don't recirculate. No washing down sidewalks, driveways, or other hardscapes. If folks are washing a car, they need to use a hose that has a shut-off nozzle. And then for our commercial customers, we're asking that restaurants, cafes, bars, other eating establishments should only provide water upon request, and hotels have to ask patrons if they want their linens and towels washed daily. I do just want to mention we have in our EBMUD store, we have things like table tents and stickers that commercial customers can request. We're actually kind of going through a process of refreshing those now just to make them consistent with the look and feel of our current drought outreach campaign.
Does the no washing down sidewalks, driveways, et cetera, also include pressure washing windows and things like that?
I would have to check whether we've included pressure washing. I don't believe pressure washing is included at this time.
I think last time we included, maybe it was a later stage.
Yeah, there were a few restrictions in 2015 and 2016 because it was a stage 4 drought. There were a few restrictions. For example, at that point, I think we were only allowing people to irrigate twice a week. There were also some restrictions on use of hydrant, potable water from hydrants for like dust control and that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't believe we're restricting power washing at this time.
Alice, I have a few other questions.
Sure.
In terms of enforcement on this, it's my experience that a lot of these things, especially I'm looking at the irrigation sort of things, but it's also these other water restrictions that, most of these, the ones that's on the slide right now are just common sense ones, and the IC implemented, see the signs in the hotels all over the place, say don't, change your towels unless you need to, the hotel thing. But the irrigation, I've seen sprinklers going recently, while it's raining or right after it's raining. How do we help the customers implement some of these things? Because I think that's some
Absolutely.
of it. Nobody would want to use
Yeah.
waste money, water, right when it's raining. They just haven't set their irrigation things the right way.
So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the Water Shortage Emergency Action Plan, but just as a quick response, we do have our water waste reporting system. So customers can call us, they can email us, there's a form on the website where they can report water waste. I think at a staff meeting today, I found out that since the beginning of April, we've gotten about 40 water waste complaints, and a lot of those were just what you're talking about. Customers who said, hey, I saw somebody had their irrigation system on even though it just rained. Hey, the city forgot to, turn off the irrigation in the park and it was raining. So usually we have a process for dealing with those. Usually, and I'd say about 95% of the cases, it's just a matter of us reaching out to the customer, letting them know what's going on, letting them know about our regulations. As you said, people generally don't want to waste water. So we do have our water waste reporting process. As part of our Water Shortage Emergency Action Plan, we're going to be developing advertising, outreach, we've started to do direct outreach to some of our cities and large irrigators to let customers know about these restrictions. Does that help?
And when we say mandatory, there's not a fine for people to do this. There's not any sort of penalty, or is there?
So there is enforcement in Section 28. Again, we generally find that the carrot works better than the stick in these situations. Usually letting customers know what's going on is enough, but if customers do persist, we can let them know that there are charges we can add to their bill. For example, if we have to go out and check multiple times, if we have to do additional meter readings, those charges can be applied to the customer's bill. There is also the provision for things like putting in a flow restrictor or even potentially shutting off the meter if the water waste is really excessive.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
That no washing down of sidewalks and driveways, that extends to commercial buildings as well?
That's everyone, yes.
Okay.
Yes, and you'll see we have the little icon of the broom there, so.
Except for health and safety. Except for health and safety.
Except
Oh,
for health
ex-
and safety.
You can still wash them down with a mop and a bucket, that's what we like.
Yeah, we want to avoid people just standing there with a
Wash your
hose
driveway with
and,
a mop
you know,
and bucket.
using
No,
a lot
I
of
mean,
water.
when there's, around buildings.
So the next recommended action is the affirming the immediate implementation of the excessive use penalty ordinance. I want to remind the board that we went through the process of updating, or you went through the process of updating this ordinance last fall, and that was to comply with state law, SB 814, that was passed and made in a law in 2016. So we are required by state law to have a method of discouraging excessive use by single-family residential customers during certain droughts. So again, as a reminder, this ordinance would apply to single-family residential customers. It would set a penalty of $2 per unit of water used above the threshold. And the threshold for stage 2 drought is 66 units per month, which works out to be roughly 1,646 gallons per day. Now, I do want to let the board know a little bit about from a process standpoint. First of all, upon enaction or activation of this ordinance, over the next couple weeks, we plan to do proactive outreach to a wide number of customers who've had high water use over the last year to let them know about this ordinance and give them resources to lower their water use. Also, when we updated the ordinance last year, we did add a warning upon the first exceedance, so customers would have a chance to course correct and change their behavior. And again, our goal here is not to penalize anyone. Our goal here is really to bring down that excessive water use, and we think that doing this broad proactive outreach will help us to do that.
And that 1,600 gallons is per household, right?
Yes, correct.
Not per individual.
Per household.
Okay.
That's a lot of water.
It is a it is a good amount of water. I would say average single-family residential water use in our service area is around 200 gallons per day. So 1,600 is a high threshold. But again, you know, our goal here is to reduce high water use.
And just as a reminder, I mean, this, the action is to affirm it because if the board declares stage 2 and mandatory water use reductions, this is self-implementing. This happens automatically.
So the next action, if the board moves forward with the resolution and the staff recommendation, it would direct staff to develop a water shortage emergency action plan. And this would be detailing how we plan to get to that 10 or 15% conservation goal. Our plan would be to return to the board at the next meeting on May 10th with a lot more additional details, although I do want to reassure you we have been working on this and discussing it for some time. So just at a high level, plan elements include figuring out what the messaging is for different sectors. As you mentioned, Director Coleman, we want to make sure that everybody's doing their part, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial. We would be looking at advertising, most likely continuing the digital and print advertising we did last year, but also potentially expanding that. We've had discussions with various TV stations, KTVU, Univision. We're also looking at outdoor advertising, potentially using our Clear Channel credits west of Hills. And then we've been in discussion with Broadway Plaza, Blackhawk Plaza, and Bishop Ranch City Center about potentially having advertising there to kind of get the word out to folks, foot traffic. We would also be looking at expanding our usual outreach and education activities, again, to give customers the tools and resources they need to save water. We're looking at enhancements to our existing rebate programs. For example, currently we offer 75 cents a square foot for our lawn rebate. We'd be looking at potentially, considering increasing that to try to get more folks to participate, accelerating the launch of some of our new conservation programs, and then we would be looking to potentially activate some of those temporary staff positions we have in our drought budget to help support these activities. And so again, we would bring quite a bit more detail to you next May, but we're certainly, happy to hear any input that you have today.
On this item, yes. Just curious, so would plan to spend more money essentially on staff and advertising and things like that. Is that
correct?
Money, where would that come from in the budget?
Well, I believe one of the next items later in the agenda is a discussion from finance on, whether we would have a drought surcharge or,
Okay, so the surcharge could go for paying for that, or is
Yeah, it could be the surcharge, or it could be reserves right now. And so we'll talk about this after the board decides to take action on the other items first.
Yeah, I just thought, since we're talking about what it is right now, I was interested just to know whether the surcharge, again, we'll come back to it, I guess, but whether the surcharge will only pays for additional water or whether it pays also for additional conservation.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give you a quick preview. I mean, the cost of the water transfers and additional staffing and potential advertising is between $30 to $40 million. And an 8% surcharge, which would be the maximum that we could charge in a stage 2, would recover about $32 million.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm clear. I would like to see some of that surcharge money be able to pay for this sort of thing.
And
Anyway.
does that projection count what the lost revenue from decreased water sales?
That does not include lost revenue.
Okay, yep, Andy.
I just want to get clarification between the recommendation that is in the cover page of the memo versus what's in the slides.
Yeah.
Because we do have 10% in the slides and the memo says 15.
Yes.
So if you could clarify if these
Yep.
coexist or if one is controlling as the staff recommendation.
Yeah, certainly. So as you said, so we, just to take a step back, there's a whole suite of actions that we're recommending here. It's all part of one package and one resolution. Some of these items sort of relate to each other or cascade from each other. For example, if you didn't want to declare a water shortage emergency, pretty much all these other items would fall away. In terms of the percentage for the water use reduction goal, as I think Mike had explained, when we were preparing the board documents a week and a half ago, we were recommending a 15%. But in light of all the recent precipitation that we got just over the last week, that turned out to be quite a bit more significant than was expected upcountry, we are now recommending a 10% water use reduction goal. Now, that being said, obviously the board has discretion. My understanding from legal is that, if you wanted to do a 10, currently the resolution is written with a 15%. If you wanted to do a 10%, I think, we can do that, accommodate that relatively easily. It just would have to be, I think, stated in the motion. Does that answer your question?
It does make sense why there would have been a shift here. So staff is recommending 10%?
10% mandatory, yes. And again, just one thing to clarify on that is, when we talk about that water use reduction goal, that is a district-wide goal, so we're not necessarily going to be asking individual customers to conserve that amount, because we know, some folks are already being pretty efficient.
And by adopting mandatory actions, we are more likely to achieve that 10% compared to our voluntary 10% from the past year.
That is correct. That is the expectation, is that saying it's mandatory and having these restrictions in place sends a clear signal to our customers. And then the water shortage emergency action plan, the advertising, the outreach, the programming will help us to, further that message to our customers and give them tools.
And that's what we've also seen just in the past when we go to mandatory, what customers will give us versus when we just ask for voluntary.
Okay, so I think,
Recognizes that our customers have been conservative, and that would be fair considering, because if you went more and they already voluntarily did more, it doesn't make sense. So this makes more sense.
correct. Okay, so, sorry, Director Coleman.
Do we have the ability to demand, like we're doing for single-family home category in the actions, to do a reduction, demand a reduction in other categories? Multifamily, I think, would be very hard because basically it's internal water use to begin with. So I don't think it's not really outside use. But
Yeah.
the industrial, commercial side, again, I'm going back to where we have the industrial side up by 10% over last year's usage. And can we say that if you don't achieve a certain reduction, whatever that number may be, then there's a penalty?
That's not in the suite of recommendations we have right now.
My
One
question is,
caution,
can we do that?
it's something we could look at. My caution on that would be a couple things. First of all, it's difficult to sort of set, just numerical restrictions like that on industrial commercial customers because their water use tends to relate a lot more to economic activity That's one challenge we have right now is we're using a 2020 baseline. That's what the state is using. 2020 was a very odd year. A lot of businesses were closed down or had reduced activity.
Right.
So some of that increase you're seeing might just be related to, businesses starting back up.
But Allison, maybe you can explain this. I mean, we don't want to confuse the matter where different categories have different percentages that we talk about, but again, this is an overall goal that we're trying to achieve.
Correct.
And different categories, so for example, irrigators, the expectation is you can provide much more in the summer than the wintertime. So our actual outreach efforts is based on the patterns of usage of the different categories.
That is absolutely true. And a couple more things I can say in relation to that. We're in a good place when you talk about like commercial water use, particularly outdoors. EBMUD has been very proactive over the decades in putting our commercial and institutional customers on dedicated irrigation meters. So it's easier for us to kind of, separate out what that irrigation use is. Most of those large customers are also in our IRIS system. Our IRIS, it's our Water Conservation's Irrigation Reduction Information System. So we've already, over the past year, begun some pretty aggressive outreach to some of those large landscapes, particularly the ones that haven't been meeting their water budgets. The other thing I'll mention around that is the governor's most recent executive order included a ban on irrigating non-functional turf in the CII sector. So there was a meeting at the state board on that last week. The state board staff recommendation includes a definition of non-functional turf that's basically, turf that is ornamental and doesn't serve any purpose for human recreation or civic or culture or community events. They're not expecting water agencies necessarily to enforce that, they said, but they are going to have that restriction in place, and they expect us to educate our customers about it. So I think that statewide restriction will help us to really get at that water use in the outdoor water use in the CII sector.
Thank you.
Yeah, Director.
Lisa?
Oh, sorry, Director.
Alice,
McIntosh.
so because our expectations are different for different classes, I remember in a prior year of drought, our messaging was a bit jumbled, and people weren't really getting it. They didn't understand really what was expected of them. So I'm hoping this time around our messaging is really on point. Because someone will say, I thought I was supposed to save 10%. I'm in a single family. And they need to understand why maybe that doesn't necessarily apply to them.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And I think, something we tried to do in our outreach and advertising campaign last year was focus more on the specific behaviors, because a lot of that's very consistent. We're asking everyone, irrigate efficiently, look for leaks, be mindful of your water use indoors. Now, I think this year we're going to be looking at getting a lot more kind of specific and targeted with that messaging, but I absolutely agree. We want to be very clear with our customers what it is that we're asking them to do.
Perfect.
Director Young?
Yeah, just following in on that, I think as we fine-tuned our messaging last time around, we got to things like strive for 35, so that people understood if you're already at 25 gallons per person per day, you don't need to do anything, right? Or
exactly.
and understanding that, if you have a baby, it's a different, it's sort of like, what's the best practice for efficient water use? And trying to define that for people and saying, with that, we can accomplish this 15% or 10% or whatever it is that we adopt, that the district is holding itself accountable to for reduction, and that will come from and I also recall that we had the same thing for our, commercial, industrial, and municipal, institutional categories as well.
Absolutely,
that
yeah.
We're looking for more from them, in their irrigation accounts and other things.
Yeah, definitely. And so, yeah, we will be looking at making our messaging very specific in terms of, what the ask is, so that, as you said, those customers who are super savers, who are already doing a lot, the message to them is keep up the good work. To folks who maybe are less efficient with their water use, we can tell them, specifically what we're asking them to do.
Great.
Yeah, I think they said it. That's what I was going to touch on.
Any other questions, comments? All right.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Alice.
So now is the opportunity to see if there's any public comment.
Okay, great. So, yeah, at this point, do we have any public comment, Risha? On this
I
item?
have two hands for public comment, and I'm going to call the first person Gary. The second. You should be able to unmute your mic.
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Okay, and your 3 minutes start now.
All right. Hello, President Lenny, Board of Directors, General Manager Chan, and Risha Cole. Congratulations, Risha, on 25 years. I actually joined the club in February. It's amazing how time flies when you're having fun. I appreciate Director McIntosh and Young's most recent comments because, my name is Gary Walters II. Today I'm speaking as a consumer and ratepayer. And I've, been in drought mode since last year. I'm asking in this forum because I believe this question would apply to more than just me. And the messaging is still a little unclear. I received my water report over the weekend. I get the emails, and I'm at less than 0.5% or less than 50% of the top 20 users at only 36 gallons a day. I strive really hard to acknowledge the drought we've been in. And what my concern is, I don't know how I'll be able to save 10 or 15% because I'm already so lean. So if this mandatory 10 or 15% conservation kicks in, am I going to be subjected to surcharges or fees? Because I can't, it's like, I would have to not shower a couple days a week or something. And my coworkers don't want that, nor I. So I guess that's probably best for Alice to answer, or maybe as the messaging comes out when the board takes action.
Gary, thanks for the comment. I'm going to take a shot at it because we've been talking about this just now. Again, it's a district-wide goal. So it means that each individual customer does not have to save another 10 or 15%. And so, in your case, a big thanks is in order to give you for conserving that, and nothing else needs to be done in that way.
I
And
appreciate that, President.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
But we haven't figured out what the surcharge is.
No, and surcharge though is a different matter. So hang around. We'll see how that is. Cause,
if it applies to all customers, then hey, that's fair. That's legit.
The plan.
And I understand the budgetary restraints we have. So I appreciate the clarification on the individual accounts, though.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Okay. One moment. Next, we have Richard L. Richard, you should be able to unmute your mic.
Okay, thank you. Board of Directors, staff, thanks for allowing me to speak. Glad to see you're finally taking some action to reduce water usage within the district. My name is Richard Lucchini. I am a East Bay Mud customer. Looking at some of the slides of the staff presented, 1,646 gallons per day. That's an unreasonable amount of water being used by somebody if that's a single family resident. I've taken action over the last 8 years of removing lawn, some fruit trees, some vegetation, and I think I've done pretty well. I'm down to about 25 gallons per day. One thing I see about the 1,646 gallons per day is that it leads me to believe, or gives somebody a conclusion, that money can buy whatever they want. And with these warnings and giving some of these water wasters time to take and come into the light and see the light, I don't believe it's necessary. We've been going through these droughts for years now, and I believe action should be taken on these wasters. It's a very precious resource and we need to conserve it. This 8% surcharge, I don't believe that people like myself that have been conserving water over the last several years should be paying that 8% surcharge. The people that are wasting the water, this 1,640 gallons per day, those people should be paying it, not those of us that already know we need to conserve. We don't need the education. The industrial settings is another one. I worked in an industrial setting for 42 years. They are wasters. They have a lot of leaks that they don't repair because of the cost. They overuse the water when they don't need to. They should be subject to the same fines as everybody else. It is not an economic thing. They should be able to take and conserve the water. So I beg of you not to put 8% on everybody. Everybody should be, the people that should be paying at 8% are the wasters. Those are the people that need the education. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Any other public comment?
There are no other hands for public comment.
All right. Any final comments from staff or board members? Yes.
We have your-
Yes. I'm following the script here a little bit. Go ahead, Andy.
I will move the staff recommendation as revised to reflect 10% in section 4 and section 5. In moving that, I don't mean to prejudge if the board wants to debate the number, but given that that is the recommendation and I support the actions that are included, including adopting section 28 and affirming our stage 2 practices, that's the motion I think is in order right now.
Second the motion.
All right, motion by Director Katz, seconded by Director Patterson. We're open for discussion.
Yeah,
I'll call on Director Young.
Yeah, I'm actually disappointed that we put a motion forward before having any discussion. But just a question, is all of our other neighboring water districts are at 15? Is that basically accurate? Well, hang on. My understanding from talking is that.
Yeah, I think Contra Costa is at 15, Alameda is at 15. I think San Francisco might be lower right now. Last I heard, I think they're maybe at 5, but it's also for a subset of their customers, not all customers. So San Francisco is kind of in a different position.
Neighboring East Bay water agencies are at 15. My second part of that is, if we thought 15 was achievable last week, I'm assuming that we still think that 15 would be achievable this week. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
All right. I understand that our revenue losses will be greater, but I don't see, we built assumptions just a couple years ago based on what we thought reality was going to be, and reality is completely different. We aren't getting CVP supply. We aren't being able to access supplemental supplies at the level that we thought we would, nor do we expect to in future years as everybody else competes with us. We have probably, I'm guessing, more environmental demands on us if the drought continues. And we have state reservoirs at levels that might compel us to do something other than, as much as would pain us to do so, having done such a good job of diversifying our water supplies, that we're in a better position than pretty much everybody else. At some point, when things go really bad, that's the time when the person that's done the best job in the class steps up and say, how can we help? So I don't think it's inconceivable that we're not at a point a year from now where people are looking at us, as Marin did, in a different way, to say, how can you help us? And that'll be a hard discussion for us, and certainly there'll be money involved in it. But so I think I'm having trouble with going down from the 15% to the 10% staff recommendation based on all of those things, and based on my crystal ball not being any better than anybody else's, but seeing what we've seen in the last 10 years of things getting worse, not better. And I don't see them getting better. I mean, it'll be wonderful if we have another 180% year next year, but there's no telling. So I'm when I do the math on where we end up in terms of total system storage in the worst case scenario, we could be at 350 next year. So that makes me quite concerned. Makes me concerned about our ability to meet our JSA requirements. It makes me concerned about, the water quality that we end up having in Pardee as we get geos. I mean, we're going to get all that stuff growing again. We'll see it later this year, I'm sure. So I'm not feeling like that I can support the 10% at this moment, unless other people can convince me otherwise.
All right, Bill.
I first wanted to thank staff for a thorough look at our current situation and give a little history. You see, we have reduced the amount of water for our ratepayers when the numbers have increased over the years, because we have done such a great job of educating and making sure the people understand. And we've had a response different from most of the other water agencies. We've also spent millions and millions of dollars to give us alternate sources to draw water during the drought, so that we didn't kill off the people. And as we reduce our usage, we also reduce the revenue that goes with it to keep this district going. We just awarded raises to all the people. We have just taken into consideration getting ready for not just this year, but next year. The questions I raised at Freeport, for example, I wanted to make sure that the turbines had been fixed. We spent $2 million overhauling them so they could draw water. Otherwise, you'd have a facility that wouldn't be operational, that other people are asking to use. I think the kinds of things that we have done have been off the chart. There is no other water agency in the state that has met our example. And so we can help more if we have more. I remember Joe Morgan saying to me years ago, he said, the only reason I can help a lot of kids who are coming forward now is because I make a lot of money. Well, we have a lot of money coming through the coffers because we have all these different funnels that we're working with to get us to First Street. And our normal is a different normal from the average water district. Some of them don't have any water, you see? But it's because they haven't done any research, they haven't put anything aside, and maybe they can't afford to. But I speak to that because in working with the Finance Committee to keep us alive and moving, I don't want to cut off my head to save the rest of my body. So keep that in mind as we go forward. And I'd like to compliment the board and the members present. And some have been here a long time working very hard to achieve these things. And what we put on staff to do and ask them to do, they have responded. And that's what puts us on the cutting edge. As I deal with the current concerns, of the environmental justice, I hear about districts all over the country that are in deep, deep trouble. They don't have any resources, and they're dependent on the government. And so helping them and achieving help for those who are the least of us, and I've got a lot of people in my ward in that position, is part of what we heard this morning. And we have to be vigilant and not to feel that we outdo everybody and have more money than everybody, but we have to take a humble approach to a district that's had the foresight and the ability and the acumen amongst those of you who develop and bring this forward for us in the interest of the people we serve, because that's the bottom line. And if we can get them over the hump a little bit better shape than others, we don't have to apologize for that. That's your work. That is what you are.
All right. Frank first? Or did you have your hand up? Yeah.
You know, I just got back from Florida, and nobody thinks of Florida as being in a drought, but the fact of it is, they don't got mountains, they don't got snow, and they've got Lake Okeechobee, which is draining dry and nasty water in it. And they've got drought restrictions, and right now they're saying, based on your house address, that's where you're going to be determining where you do your water. And the first offense is a warning, and the second offense is a $100 fine. But here's where it gets really good fun. They got a guy running around in a pickup truck overnight, up and down the streets, looking for puddles of water, and he's writing tickets right then and there on the spot. And I thought they were kidding, but no. Oh, and just to make sure you don't spot the pickup truck's painted black. So they're out there doing it, and we're talking about this as where we're going. They haven't quite hit that level, but you won't believe what their reservoirs are. Canals, freshwater canals. And because they're draining down so dry, doggone it, they're starting to get really nasty. So they got big problems. If this will help us get to where we're going, then this is what we need to do. And that's how I feel about it.
Lisa, and then Andy.
Marguerite makes a good point about the 10% versus 15%. I've been struggling with that here myself, but I really think we should give our ratepayers an opportunity to rise to the occasion with a mandatory requirement. But following that, so what happens if in September of this year, we're in a worse position than a much worse position? So what would it entail going from a 10% to a 15, even just later this year? Findings. Well, obviously findings. But, is it a simple process?
Are you talking about a worse condition that our customers don't respond to the
Yes.
10%?
Yes.
I mean, in that case, I mean, there'd be more outreach and actions that we would do through the conservation to achieve those goals. I mean, it ratchets up how we outreach to the customers.
Okay.
We won't know the water supply situation, obviously, until later in the year.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, and then John.
I think Director Young makes a very compelling argument about signaling a 15% reduction being the most reasonable communication with our customers right now. I'm particularly persuaded that we're not just communicating with our customers, but we're in a region. Where we need to be a good neighbor with San Francisco, with Marin, with Contra Costa, with other municipal suppliers who have more severe supply situations compared to us. And I do think that we need to be participating as a good neighbor in that communications environment. And that, in that vein, 15% is incredibly important for us to be sharing that message and being in step with our partners. It doesn't change very much in terms of the mandatory restrictions. They're the same restrictions whether we declare 10 or 15. It doesn't change the type of surcharge that we would implement. That's a separate policy discussion. This is really about messaging. And I think now, if we get a better conservation response from our customers, that's a big benefit to district customers for the future. It's a big relief for the conditions that affect what we release down the river. It's a big change in terms of relief for our supplies when we don't get when we don't get the same supplies from the Central Valley project that we had contracted with. So with that, I'd like to amend the motion to be as drafted, at the resolution as drafted. On the will of the board, if we have a straw poll that says otherwise, but I was persuaded by Director Young's comments that I would like to change the motion at this time.
All right, so you're amending your motion?
Correct.
Point of order.
Can I speak?
I was waiting to see, all right.
Well,
We have a point of order, I'll go with that first. Go ahead, Bill.
it has to have a second.
Point of order can, I think, supersedes.
I think
anything.
the board has the prerogative to do what it does in moving this item. But I think the argument that I've heard is not consistent with what we've been administering through our conservation program and our education unit to our public. We have actually told them that saving what that accrues to us and saving just to be like the rest of everybody. How did we spend all this money?
Bill, I'm going to interrupt for 1 second. So that point of order, I thought your question was about, because John was in line to
Well, it is.
discuss the motion.
And well, you can go ahead and do the process, and that is to hear the amendment if that's what they want to do, but.
Yeah, I mean, we'll make sure everyone has a chance to speak to this item.
All right,
in whatever
thank you.
way.
Thank you.
I'm not sure exactly what happens when we have an amended item or amendment, but I assume we have to have a second.
Seconder has to.
Right,
Vote on the
okay,
amendment.
so let's take a moment. Is there a second for his item?
Oh, can I just make just to be clear, because I'm looking at the notes. We had an original motion. Andy put forth an amendment to amend the motion, so that motion is on the floor, to amend it to 10%.
Was the first motion seconded?
Yes.
Yes, Director Patterson
By Bill,
seconded.
who has to accept the amended, I can't remember how it
If he doesn't
works.
accept the amended motion, then Andy can make his new motion at the 15%, which needs a second, and then that's it, motion on the floor.
I mean, I assume Andy's basically withdrawing his first motion.
No,
or amending it.
what I've done is I've amended my motion, and the seconder may decide to withdraw the second or to maintain the second, at which time the motion would then need a second if it didn't have that second anymore.
No, I would not second that.
Okay,
I will second that motion.
What are we doing?
So,
15%.
Bill's withdrawn his second.
Okay.
I've replaced it for the new motion. For a second.
all right, so the new motion we're debating on is technically 15%, but frankly,
Retain the original staff recommendation as presented in our
report.
papers, for staff
yes,
report.
that report, all right.
So-
So, but I'm willing to entertain all discussion on any of it, the same as before. Bill, did you want to finish your thought? John hasn't had a chance to speak yet, but,
Let John go ahead, I'll speak last.
okay.
Thank you. You know, this is going to sound really weird, probably to a lot of my customers. I was ready and willing to support the 10%. Staff modified recommendation. I rarely have ever supported things like this, but we're in a critical water situation. And we certainly don't know where we're going to be 1 year from now. And I don't like the fact that the burden, financial burden, potentially falls on one customer class. That's state law. That's the way it is. So that's what we have to live with and work with. But the fact is, we have a situation, our customers have stepped up except in one category of class on reducing their water, and I'm expecting our water conservation people, based on what Alice talked about, will be working very heavily with the industrial water users to make sure that their water use, which is up by 10%, is actually going to be going down significantly in order for us to meet the overall goal of, I hope, of a 10% reduction. So I was prepared, Andy, believe it or not, to support your motion at 10%. I have a lot of qualms about it. I am not prepared to support the 15%, somewhat tied to what Bill talked about. Our customers have done a hell of a job in every drought when we've asked them to cut back. And the fact is that we have spent an enormous amount of money, $528 million to build Freeport and other projects such as that, to diversify our supply. And we're working now with CCWD and others on enlarging Los Vaqueros, which is going to help them in the future. But some agencies, for financial reasons or otherwise, have not stepped up to the plate to do that. And I don't think it's fair that our ratepayers are going to share the burden when we have done that, and our rates reflect what we've done in order to make sure that we have an adequate supply. And we do, based on all the presentations that we had today. But we are in a critical situation, and our customers need to understand that. And I think a 10% reduction, mandatory reduction, is an acceptable way to do it. We will achieve it, and I will put money on it. We will exceed it.
All right. Bill, did you want to say anything else? I haven't made my remarks yet, but.
I think we can get on with it. I said a lot before, but again, I'm taking the position of our ratepayers, and some of them are falling through the cracks, and they're still coming up with money to keep up with everything. And we have to be very, very careful that what's taken us a long time to gain doesn't get lost. So I just want to emphasize that. And I've been watching everything on all sides for a long, long time.
All right, thank you. Frank, did you want to say anything before? Okay. So I come at this from a perspective of my prime responsibility, our prime responsibility as East Bay MUD is to provide a reliable supply at a fair price. If our customers save more water, that means there's less additional water that we have to go out and purchase at a very high price, which is why we're going to be debating the surcharge that comes for that. So there's a value to everyone's decreasing their use of water in whatever way makes sense for them, economically for them. I think we have to use this particular situation that we're in as an opportunity to educate the public about how they can use water more conservationally, more efficiently, and a message of 15% instead of 10% sends that message more strongly and encourages it to do that. And that way we actually have a more reliable supply. If we decrease, the more lawns that we take out, the more devices that we put in, increases both our reliability and our cost to our customers. And so it's, I think it's a win-win in both cases that way. Particularly with, and I recognize that a lot of our customers have saved money, and there's going to be confusion, as we even saw from Gary Walters, that concern about whether they're saving enough. I think there's opportunities for us, again, to be able to address that and really focus on those customers who do use that. But technically, whether it's 10% or 15%, it's not going to change what we actually do. It's a district-wide sort of thing. It may make us work harder. It certainly sends the signal to our customers, but it doesn't increase the fines. It doesn't change what you do. It's to me, a 15% becomes an aspirational goal. And if we have 10% as our aspirational goal, it's not as good as a 15% at a time like this. I'm hoping that it'll spur our customers to work that much harder to save water at a time when they're aware that there's water that needs to be saved and things that they can do still to do that. It sends, and finally, you know, the 15% sends a message that water is a precious resource. It's something that we talk about all the time. If we don't use the water, there's more water left for other districts, other uses, for farmers who need that water for their food crops, for fish and the other aquatic animals that want to have that water in the river. I just think it's the right thing to have a higher goal for people on this at a time like this and use this as an opportunity. Any other comments? All right, well, let's have a vote. Do we want to take a roll call vote? Oh, Frank, now you're...
Which one are we voting on?
We are voting on 15%.
Okay.
Excuse me, one
The
moment.
motion as
Wait,
written in the staff report.
one moment. We're actually still in the public hearing.
Oh, okay. You got
Yeah.
more?
So let's close the public hearing, and then we'll move to items, because the vote is actually on items 12.1 through 12.5.
Okay.
And it's just, you had the public hearing, you had the presentation.
So
You
we need a
discussed-
motion and a second.
Still part of the hearing?
The surcharge is
Yeah,
actually
surcharge
item
is not part of the
13.
hearing for today.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And so if you can request a motion and a second to close the public hearing, then we'll move to items 12.1 and 12.5.
All right. Motion by Director McIntosh, seconded by Director Mellon. And once again, our secretary is the close the hearing. Once again, our secretary is providing valuable guidance and making us look good, as Frank said earlier. All right, so we'll have a roll call vote?
No, you can just,
Okay, regular vote? Oh, I'm sorry, close the hearing. All in favor of closing the hearing? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Unanimously carries. We are now closed for the public hearing. We'll now proceed to take actions on the items 12.1 through 12.5.
and President Lenny, if I can ask, because we've had a lot of discussion, if you can just restate each action, and specifically the action for 12.2, to understand that we're voting on 15% instead of the 10, and then that way the record will be clear for everybody
Sure.
listening and for the minutes.
And if you'd like, I can maybe quickly summarize that.
Or I can just read the list here so it's real clear.
Sure.
Why don't we do that? So we're adopting a resolution taking certain actions in response to the current drought water supply conditions and making necessary findings. 12.1, declaring a water shortage emergency within the district's service area. In 12.2, we're declaring a stage 2 drought and declaring mandatory district-wide water use reduction goal of 15% in accordance with the district's water shortage contingency plan. 12.3, we're adopting section 28, the water use during water shortage emergency condition of the district's regulations governing water service to customers, which defines and imposes temporary water use prohibitions and restrictions and enforcement provisions that will be effective April 26th, 2022, and remain in effect until section 28 is either revised based on changed circumstances or rescinded when the water shortage emergency is declared over. Furthermore, 12.4, we're affirming the immediate implementation of the district's excessive water use penalty ordinance. That's ordinance number 373-21. And finally, 12.5, directing the staff to develop a water shortage emergency action plan for consideration at an upcoming board meeting. All right, any further comments, clarifications? We have a motion and a second on the floor.
And that motion was Director Katz and seconded by Director Young?
That's correct.
Okay.
Let's have a roll call vote on this one.
All right. Roll call vote. Director Coleman?
No.
Director Katz?
Yes.
Director McIntosh?
No.
Director Mellon?
No.
Director Patterson?
No.
Director Young?
Yes.
President Lenny?
Yes. Okay, motion fails to carry.
I'll move the staff recommendation 12.1 to 12.5 with change of 15% to 10%.
I'll second that.
Hold on.
All right, so this is all items, as I read earlier, with a change on 12.2 from I'll read 12.2 over again then. Declare a stage 2 drought and declare a mandatory district-wide use reduction goal of 10% in accordance with the district's water shortage contingency plan.
May I,
That's a new motion? We can have a,
it's a substitute motion, sorry.
okay.
That, you know, as Lisa, I think, sort of entertained, that we make a point of revisiting the number based on based on our ability to, you know, if we don't meet the 10, that we can come back in September, I would say, if that, unless October makes more sense, but.
Yeah, it might be difficult by September to have all the data, just given the billing
billing
cycle,
cycle.
for us to know whether or not we've achieved those savings over the summer.
Yeah, it's no,
Isn't that?
I don't want to wait till next April to make a decision about going up again, if we have to go up. So that's my,
So what would be a good month
Yeah, when
to-
would-
in your, to reevaluate?
Marguerite, if I could ask, isn't that what this says when it remain in effect until section 28 is either revised based on changed circumstances or rescinded? I mean,
but section 28 is about actions, things that are prohibited to do, not about the mandatory, not about the level of conservation that we require.
So let me, Margaret, to your question, Clifford, if we were to look at this in November, we'd have our numbers through the end of September.
Yeah, I think during past droughts, you know, we have come back, depending on the circumstances, in November and December, and Mike, you can correct me, but I think that's happened before in the past, where we can report out on progress.
yeah.
And I'm fine with changing the motion to the November, December timeframe, if the numbers aren't met.
To consider revising. Okay, as long as that's in there, that we're locked in to coming back and saying,
and I'm willing to second that.
okay.
President Lenny, can you please state the motion?
So we have the same as I had said before, but we are putting in an additional provision that says we are going to revisit this percentage in November, at what, first November meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, that we will revisit basically section 12.2 at that point in time.
Okay.
Any further discussion? All right, we'll have a roll call vote.
And this is for 12.1 through 12.5, and 12.2 has been changed to amend the percentage from 15% to 10%, and an additional provision to revisit the percentage at the first meeting in November.
Yes.
And that was first by Director Coleman, second by Director Mellon. Okay, and the roll call vote.
I just want to say before we have the vote that I feel very strongly about the 15% aspirational goal. And I think despite what our customers have saved, and of course, we haven't achieved the 10% completely, that this is still insufficient. I'm going to stick with my position. But go ahead, roll call vote.
As am I.
Okay. Roll call vote. Director Coleman?
Yes.
Director Katz?
Yes.
Director McIntosh?
Yes.
Director Mellon?
Yes.
Director Patterson?
Yes.
Director Young?
Yes.
President Lenny.
No.
No, you're gonna stick with no. Can I change my vote?
You have the right to do that.
Actually, can I,
You can do it.
well, you know what I would have done? I would have separated the items. We can't do that. It's
Okay,
fine, I'll stick with, I won't change my vote.
So the vote is we have 6-1 with President Lenny voting no.
Yes.
And just to state for the record, I think it's important that we have to have, I voted yes to have 1, 3, 4, and 5, and I agree that I hope we can get to 15%.
Right, and
Alice.
And I think it's clear from the votes that this board is unanimous in taking the caution and the preparedness, on the advice of staff that we need to be at a stage 2 drought.
Yes.
Even though our guidelines under prior circumstances did not predict that, our findings that the staff included in the resolution make it mathematically clear that we can't depend on the Central Valley project the same way as we could, and I appreciate the staff's clarity in explaining that to the board and the board's consensus on everything else but the one issue that we did have a debate over.
Thank you.
Okay.
all right, so we're on to items 13 and 14.
Yeah, thank you for that difficult
13
discussion.
first.
So next we have Sophia Skota, our Director of Finance, who will present the estimates of the drought cost and the drought budget. Just as a reminder, as part of our Prop 218 notice for the fiscal year 22 and 23 rate proposal, we did include drought surcharges to help recover the costs, our drought costs, if we're in a stage 2 or higher. In a stage 2 declaration, the maximum surcharge that we can impose is 8%. Sophia will review the information, and with board input, we'll bring a proposal for a drought surcharge for board consideration at the May 10th board meeting.
Good afternoon, Board of Directors. And I believe the slides are going to be pulled up, and while those are being pulled up, just to respond to some of the questions that were being asked during the prior item. One, Director Coleman, you're correct. There's a 10% in the report that you have reported with respect to the reductions in industrial. But just a point there, a year ago, we don't believe that industrial was at full swing yet, given kind of the economy and the pandemic closures. And residential was actually minus 13.6%, and then the total was 8%. The other point that I wanted to make sure to bring up is it was correct, Alameda County and Contra Costa County at 15% mandatory. San Francisco is 10% voluntary still, so they're still in a stage 1 in their paradigm. So as I set the stage to review our drought surcharges, I did want to point out that the last time that we were here before you, that I was here before you on a drought surcharge that we imposed was in the summer of 2015. And that drought surcharge went into effect in July of 2015 and was in effect until June of 2016. And that was a stage 4 drought surcharge, and that was 25%. So next slide. So our stage system of drought rates is part of our drought management program overall. And so if you look to the far right of this chart, you'll see the maximum applicable drought surcharge given any particular stage of drought. So 0, up to 8, up to 20, and up to 25. And again, as our general manager pointed out, these were included in our FY22 and 23 Proposition 218 notices to comply with the requirements of our state constitution. And these drought surcharges would be applicable on all water use, metered water use, and we would not have, and there is not the ability when we come back in May to consider this, to have those placed on only some subset of customers, because this is gone through a Proposition 218 process, and so it's not possible to say, certain users that use a certain amount of water and so on. So this is all through a cost of service process, and we can't subsidize one customer's water use with another, and so this is a requirement.
But it's only on the variable.
That's correct. That is on the water use. That is correct. Next slide. So with respect to drought costs, we think of it as kind of 2 categories of drought costs. So there are the direct costs, so those are the water purchases, the transmission costs, so the fact that we have to pump that water, treatment costs, and then costs for public information and customer support programs. As you imagine, Alice And her team and Kelly and her team are going to have a lot of work to achieve what we're setting out to do. And so that takes additional staff and resources. Then there's sort of what I think of as more indirect costs, which are the reduction of revenue as a result for the calls for conservation. Next slide. So when we look at our drought costs for fiscal year 22, that's the fiscal year that we're in now, that again will end at the end of June, we have spent about $7 million, and we have at this point brought in 33.9 thousand acre feet of supplemental water so far, and are hoping for some additional deliveries from UBA. They may actually come in later, maybe in July. With respect to FY23 drought costs, the preliminary estimate, and Mike's team are out there beating the bushes, as you all know, but the preliminary estimates are $30 to $40 million, that the water is going to be more expensive than we had hoped when we were putting this plan together, as Director Young had sort of pointed out in the past. And of course, those purchases are going to be dependent on even availability. And we know, as many of you have pointed out, about the news with the CDP and the allocations for the chairman. We do plan in FY23, as I said, to go ahead and launch our public information and customer support programs. And we'll be coming back to you when we go through the mid-cycle budget, asking for approval, essentially, to move forward with positions and drought funding, essentially, to activate that portion of our budget that we kind of keep in abeyance and that we ask for your support to move forward with when the need comes. So we'll be coming back to you for that. And so that is where we're going to be approving the additional limited term positions in groups like public affairs and water conservation. So when we look at our costs of the call for conservation, 15% reduction would result in approximately a $57 million reduction in revenue. And if you were to look at a 10%, it's probably more in the realm of 30. So you might say, well, gosh, that's not 1.5 times. And the reason is, of course, as you ask for deeper conservation, you're getting the higher, more expensive tiered water obviously is getting cut. And so, and that's great, but it also means reduced revenue. So with respect to the conservation, an MGD reduces revenue by $2.5 million, but really it's closer to $3.2 million when you consider the fact that we also have the elevation surcharges, which pay for the capital and the energy for those that live at elevation to pump up that water. So more like $3.2 million. Next slide. So with respect to revenues from a drought to stage 2 surcharge, we know that we can put a surcharge into a place that is anywhere up to an 8%. So this is just a range of what kind of revenue we might expect to bring in from such a surcharge. So 8 million from a 2% and 8% about 32 million. So with regards to the discussions that we had had previously about the amount that we expect to pay, spending $30 to $40 million on water supplies would mean that an 8% surcharge would pay just for those purchases in essence. And if you're also wondering what does an 8% surcharge mean for an average customer, and again, this is the customer that Alice Toohey spoke about earlier, using, let's say, 200 gallons per day in their home, it would be paying about 10 cents extra per day, or about $3 extra per month if they didn't, change, obviously, their water use habits. But
I'm sorry, Sophie.
yes,
Could you repeat that?
10 cents per day, or about $3 per month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, next slide. So again, if we look at drought costs and how we would want to fund those, a maximum of the 8% would fund, most of what we expect to pay for the water purchases. Of course, not knowing exactly what those numbers are going to be, and then when we look at what would we do about the fact that we have revenue shortfall from water conservation? We're proposing at this point that we would fund all of those from our reserves. We have strong reserves. We've been prudent, and we would propose at this point that we would pay for those through our reserves. And in future stages, obviously that can be revisited if the drought persists and continues. We do, in our Prop 218, we are able to recover those. But at this point, we're talking about using reserves. And also wanted to point out with respect to coverage, that we always have our rate stabilization fund, which I really like to call our coverage stabilization fund. So there's not an issue there from a debt perspective. There's a question.
How much do we have in our rate stabilization fund?
The rate stabilization fund is a $150 million balance, and so again, that's for coverage. But if you actually look at our reserves, we have more than that in reserves.
How much do we have in reserves?
Well, this morning, the district as a whole, that includes all of our, that would include wastewater, was at 780 million, but let's say somewhere in the realm of, realistically, I don't know, 400 or
Okay.
something like that. But I don't hold me to that number, Director Coleman. I
It
want
changes.
to,
Yeah.
because we have to look at what are the ones for insurance that we want to make sure
No,
that we
I
keep
un- I
aside.
understand
et cetera.
that.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, next slide. So with respect to agency comparisons, we've already heard about the statewide order for level 2 water shortage contingency plans. And we do know that some agencies have already instituted drought surcharges and that others are considering those now. So we will be presenting a survey of local utilities on May 10th when we come back to discuss this drought surcharge. Next slide. So this shows kind of some neighboring agencies right now, and these are all of the agencies that have some kind of a drought surcharge or drought rate in place, and these range quite a bit. The lowest one is around 4%, and that's Livermore. That's on the base rate, kind of the drought rate as a percentage of the base rate, and the highest one is Pleasanton at 18%. When you kind of average that out. So again, that concludes my presentation, and the idea is to give the board information to provide direction to the board. And again, the last time that we had drought rates in place was during that fiscal year 16, and that was a stage 4 with 25%. And I can answer any questions, or I'll do my best here.
Just for clarification, so Livermore charges, it has a 4% surcharge on the fixed cost, and it's not on the variable?
The 4% is, no, it's on the base rate, so no, it's a per unit of water use.
What does it mean, base rate, though?
So their base rate for Livermore is $3.31 per unit of water per CCF, and then they basically have a drought surcharge of 13 cents on top of that, which is 4%.
Right, but so what's above their base rate? Do they have tiers?
I actually don't have all of their drought
Okay,
all
I'm
of
just,
the
it's
rate
just
structure.
curious to me that the surcharge is on the first unit of, I mean, if they do have tiered rates, why it wouldn't continue to be applied to the higher tier? But I don't know how their rate structure works.
This is more about how I summarized my notes for this rather than anything about their particular drought rate. And it just was to kind of show that, even somebody that was a low water user would pay at least 4% more.
Okay.
All right, Andy?
We did hear a speaker in our public comment. We did hear a speaker in our public comment who did express a perspective that have considered in our past cost of service studies about really cost causation and what types of uses, what subclasses of our residential class are really causing the need for the infrastructure and supplemental supplies that put us closer to this level of drought severity and frequency. And so I'm interested in that type of perspective, but I also appreciate that they're really, we're unable to be responsive to putting our drought surcharge on tier 2 only or tier 3 only in the middle of this drought, where we have to really go through a cost of service study, which will be considered in future years as part of a regular update cycle. But I was listening to that comment and would like to reflect on that at the appropriate time. So in the meantime, we have an adopted schedule of rates and charges that has one across the board increase of a percentage of the surcharge, and that's what we have to adopt across the board. Across all of our rates and charges, it's just one simple percentage. Is that
that's
is
correct?
that right?
And however, the infrastructure piece that you mentioned, that's already covered in the cost of service, where we basically say those who required us to have more facilities are proportionally that's adjusted, and that's why we have higher tiers. That's the justification for tiers, that those who are using more water are causing those costs. So the infrastructure piece is there, and everything else, you know, that you said, yes, that's
Yeah, so I just wanted to state that because we did have an interesting public comment about that, and I wanted to acknowledge it.
And also, you know, since we do have tiered rates, obviously, you know, 2% or 8% on the higher tier is a higher charge.
What would be helpful, you know, I don't really view this tool day to day as our best tool for getting water use reductions. Our best tools are some of the mandatory restrictions, our marketing and communications, our customer assistance in water conservation programs. Those are our best and most cost-effective tools. There is a small, you know, elasticity-based, you know, measurable based on elasticity kind of effect from just having a drought surcharge. But the main policy reason to have a surcharge is to make sure that we have a sound budget.
Fiscal, that's
correct. Yeah, it's fiscal, and so I'm pretty open to the you know the discussion at the board. And for our next meeting, I'd like some analysis about if we were to err on the side of customers not paying the charge for a portion of the year, when would be that month that we would take a closer look and identify, yes, it's going to be a dry fiscal year 23. Because it does seem like there, you know, we could make a fiscally reasonable decision that we will absorb the full costs into the current rate stabilization fund, or a part of the cost in the rate stabilization fund. But I think it would be fiscally irresponsible to do that, you know, if we had a second dry year. So I think we really do need to be prepared. So what I'd like is some analysis of what happens if next year is wet, what happens if next year is dry, and how much money will be irrecoverable based on a couple options in the middle of the winter or spring, so that we're able to make a bit, you know, a factual basis for some of those decisions. But I'm pretty open to the options that are in front of us and the views of the board.
And I guess how I look at this, maybe if I understand this correctly, I mean, if next year is wet, I mean, we're going to make another determination, the second board meeting in April in 2023, at which point, you know, the board may decide to, you know, go back to stage 0 or stage 1, and then the surcharge would disappear. You know, right now, you know, the water that we have planned to purchase from Yuba and Placer, I mean, that's something that the board had authorized and we're committed to. We're going to spend that money. And so the further you wait, the less opportunity you have to recover those costs. And, you know, and you can build up until April. Now, if the drought continues, that's a different story, but nobody has a crystal ball to determine that. So, you know, the more you wait, the more lost opportunity is to recover those costs.
John.
A real quick question, Sophia. What, have we done a study yet, or a quick analysis, napkin analysis? We saw today in our finance committee meeting that we're looking at the CAP program growing by threefold potentially in the short term. And what is the, and it's growing for a lot of reasons, but part of it is people can't afford, their economic situation has changed, and a lot of parameters, including water, energy, and all that are going up. The more people, if we were to go 8%, let's say hypothetically, on top of what our rates would be, how many more people may fall into the CAP program than are currently in it as a result, and what is that from a revenue standpoint to the district? And how, and we talked about bringing revenue in for the CAP program, but we also know that that's not a guarantee, and it's because it can only come from 4 sources, I believe. So what is the impact to our customers who are low income, who may fall under the threshold of qualifying for CAP as a result of, let's say, an 8% surcharge on this, and then our regular rates that we're looking at doing?
So our customers, it doesn't change whether somebody is qualified for CAP, because that's income based on whether you're qualified.
Okay.
The question on whether, you know, the 8% surcharge would push those who do qualify to sign up for CAP, I think would be very difficult to estimate, you know, what that might be. But as far as like who's qualified, that's income based. That you know, whether we do 8% or 0, those who qualify, will, that doesn't change.
So on the income based, I understand that part of it, Clifford, but how much of it is when you take into account, at some point, I mean, the income is X, and all of a sudden you have the variables of food, energy, water, all the things that you live by, the CPI basically. As that goes up, which is going up, aren't more people going to be qualifying for CAP as a result?
That's not how the qualification for CAP,
Okay.
but I think the question is, like, does that extra for the average user, does $3 a month push them over to, I'm gonna sign up for CAP or not? That would be, that'd be very difficult to estimate.
Well, it's a separate question of whether the FPL is federal poverty level. If that changes as a result of inflation and that goes up, then what we set our cap level at is tiered off of that at 400%, right? So it's a little bit apples and orange. I mean, most cap customers are at or below our average water use, so they're going to be, if we went to 8%, they'd be at $1.50, because they're they only pay 50% per month, so $3 every billing cycle. So I think, and the other factor is that even if we triple the number of CAP customers that we have, it is still an exceedingly small percentage of our overall customer base, or at least from my perspective, because that's not the constraint. Isn't how many people might be eligible for CAP; it's how many people
Sign up. As
So
Clifford said, people may be driven to sign up where they weren't before because they're feeling an economic pinch.
right, no, they may be, but our capacity to actually incorporate people that are eligible is we can't. We don't have the revenue to do that, even if we grow it by 3 times.
So we're not voting on this today. At our May 10th meeting, staff is coming back with the full proposal with cost of service, a funding plan, et cetera. True?
The cost of service was already approved as part of our 218 process.
Okay.
Yeah.
But a funding plan.
Yeah, funding plan, so basically we would be coming back with a request to approve a drought surcharge at a certain level, and so we're looking for feedback on.
We're just looking for feedback today on
Okay.
where the board likes to fall between, say, anywhere from, nothing to 8%. So that when we come on May 10th, that, we've incorporated your feedback on that number.
Well,
I kind of think it's just backwards, but nevertheless, go ahead.
Marguerite,
With
Bill?
respect to kind of looking for a recommendation from staff?
Well, yeah, looking for a recommendation today when we aren't in possession of all of the information.
So, I mean, if there are questions, I mean, so what I would say is, if the board wants to cover all of the cost of the purchases of water, then the board would approve an 8% surcharge.
Yeah.
In that case, we, as the district, will absorb, we would have to absorb, based on what we believe we're going to have to pay for that water, we will still have to absorb the cost of conservation, and we believe that we can do that from our reserves. If the board chooses a lower level than 8% and the costs of the water come in where we think they're going to, then we will be absorbing more of those costs from our reserves. So that's, sorry if I wasn't clear.
So, I mean, the recommendation from staff, there's nothing that clearly states staff's recommendation here, but apparently 8% is the recommendation.
Yeah.
No, that's the max.
That's the max that we could charge.
Well, I'm looking for,
I think she's trying to seek what we had like,
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
it's a philosophical question.
yeah.
It is.
Really. I mean, that's what it boils down to,
Oh.
right? So
Yeah.
you're asking for what our philosophical viewpoint
Yeah.
is on this question as you examine what the staff's recommendation is going to be. So you're
John
taking
wants
a temperature
10%, is
check.
that right?
It's a temperature check.
At 4.
So I'll be clear. I think that because it's only on the flow charge, it is like the only place that our super saving customers get a break during the drought. Everybody's got to pay for. I mean, so I'm closer to the 8%. Support higher level of surcharge. We already are spending, close to $10 million this year on things that we're not, we can't recover. And as we look at cost of service in the next go-round, do want to take into account some of the points that Andy raised and looking at things like a tier 0 for people that are at really don't use very much water, like that incorporates a certain amount of water, so that we don't end up with, and when we're in drought, with a surcharge on the people that are only using 25 gallons per person per day, for instance, or something like that. So that's my philosophical place is
Thank you.
closer to 8 than 0.
And maybe just for a quick summary, and I'll just summarize what I think the recommendation should be. If you look at the cost of the water and you look at the potential lost revenue up to 15%, if we get to 15, but on the low end, if we get 10% and the cost of the water ends up to be 30 million, we're probably around $60 million of the cost. On the upper end, you're close to $100 million. And so, if we were to recommend anything, just so we don't have to go too much into our reserves, we would recommend 8% to recover at least the cost of our water, which would be $32 million. If we do nothing, if the board chooses to go 0 and we achieve 15% savings and it costs us $40 million, that's $100 million that's not budgeted for.
Okay, all right. And I'm leaning towards the 8 as well.
All right, Frank, I think you had your hand up.
Well, I think I'm going to take my hand down. Thank you very much.
I'll speak up just since you're taking a straw poll. I'm leaning towards the 4%.
Okay.
I think Clifford was very persuasive in the explanation about how much money we would save. I am open to thinking about if we get relief from the weather this winter, that we might consider when to turn around, because I do think that we can probably manage the budget impact if this is only one dry year, but we really do need to be prepared, and so that's why I'm open to instituting something at this time. And those numbers that Clifford just explained, I think put me in the 4 to 8 range, and I'm leaning towards the 8 end.
Others? Feeling philosophical? All right, I have some questions if you want to give a little more thought. Right? So I had a question, actually, just this interesting conundrum between how much we pay for additional water and how much it costs us to save water. And if I'm reading your chart on page 3, the drought costs details correctly, it actually costs us less to replace the water than it does to conserve or to lose the revenue through conserving water.
If there were, if there's water available, certainly it makes economic sense not to, force, the loss of that revenue. But, there are many considerations. Obviously, our pocketbook isn't our only consideration.
Right, just from a strictly cost perspective.
Just a question on that, though. Is the replacement water, does that include, so with our customers, it's the cost of the treated water, blah, 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 right? What we're charging people. Is is this replaced water translated into end user cost? Because I'm concerned that it may not be actually comparing, that the numbers aren't the same when we're talking about what our lost revenue is.
Yes, so on the lost revenue side, that's truly the lost revenue that we get from selling the water to our customers. So to your point, President Linney, is if you look at what we're paying, the higher cost of water, non-CVP water, that 5% of savings is about 10,000 acre feet of water. That, if water were somehow available that we can buy, that saves us 10,000 acre feet. It is still cheaper, even at the more expensive cost of water, for us to buy the water, assuming it's available. If it were CVP water, it would be significantly less for us to buy the water than to ask our customers for that additional savings.
Okay, it's good to get that clarification.
Any other questions?
Even accounting for the cost of report
Yes.
over time?
Even accounting
and separating that out?
Yes.
I'd sure like to see that. I'm sure it's in the cost of service.
All right, and I will say that I'm at the 8% because I do think that those costs, I think that it strikes a good balance between, trying to recover those costs at the time they're happening and also using our rate stabilization fund to pay for some of this cost. It doesn't put all the burden on that surcharge. Frank, Bill, one last chance. Okay.
Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you very much.
So we have a last presentation, a very brief presentation on our COVID update, and we have Dave Briggs to provide that update.
Okay, thank you, Clifford. Yeah, I'll be brief. Good afternoon, President Lenny. Good afternoon, members of the board. Just a few points to make to bring you up to speed on where we are. Just this slide is showing the positivity rate in our two counties, Alameda County, Contra Costa County. Below that is the latest graphic of our employee positives. I will note that the April figure is now 19, and the total is 474. We did get 4 positives since late last week. So compared to the Omicron surge a few months ago, it still looks pretty tame, but compared to the Delta surge last summer, it's comparable. So we are seeing a bit of an increase. This is consistent with what just about every demographic is showing, a slow linear growth of cases across the country within California. So on one level, that's not good. The positivity rate is a bit elevated in Alameda County and in San Francisco. The highest positivity rates in the state are here locally. But that being said, the hospitalization rates, the death rates remain very low. We are in a mild surge. That's how I would characterize it. We're in a mild surge where there are some indications that we are plateauing and perhaps post-peak. Maybe that's optimistic, or looking at it optimistically, but I think some of the data is indicating that. Real quick, just to update you on really the regulatory environment and the advice that we're getting nationally and it's at the state health level. The board knows that the California Department of Public Health did relax the quarantine requirement earlier in the month. So if you're asymptomatic, regardless of your vaccination status, it is recommended that you do not quarantine. You don't have to quarantine. Cal OSHA did adopt those recommendations in their rulemaking last week. However, Alameda County, perhaps the only county in the state, at least the only one, we've checked all the ones that we care about, and Alameda County appears to be the only county that has not adopted that latest guidance, statewide guidance, in their local health order. So as we have throughout the pandemic, we always adopt the most conservative, the most protective health order if there is inconsistency at the local level. So we remain on the county, on the Alameda County health order throughout our employee, throughout our counties that we operate in for all of our employees. And so we still have the more protective quarantine requirement. Hopefully that makes sense. Otherwise, there are no changes in our protocols. And I will say, looking at the relatively static nature of the guidance we're getting at the local and state level, coupled with the data that I just showed you, I don't think it's really the time now to relax our indoor face covering requirement, but perhaps if things improve in the next few weeks, we can have that conversation and move that direction. But now does not appear to be the right time.
Dave, can I ask you a question on the previous point? No longer requires or no longer recommends quarantine if asymptomatic. I don't quite understand the logic behind that, because my understanding is asymptomatic, you're still can be a spreader.
So that's correct. The latest variant, the infectious period is very, very short. It appears to be possibly 2 to 3 days. So if you are asymptomatic, by the time that contact tracing happens and we find out if the person who may have had it actually tests positive, the value of quarantining has kind of gone out the window. And so that's basically the logic behind the CDC and California DPH in saying that if you are asymptomatic, yes, you could be carrying it, but your infectious period is over relatively quick.
Just for the asymptomatic people. I mean, if you actually get it and you have a fever or whatever else.
Absolutely. If you are symptomatic or you're positive, well, that has not changed. You are at home. You're in isolation.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. The last. So we're always monitoring the situation, of course, as we have been. The one change I would point out here is that our exempted employees, those that have a medical or religious exemption, they have been testing every week since September. We've gone almost 2 weeks without a positive in that group, and they are testing on-site regularly every week. If that trend continues, perhaps for another week, and if the positivity rate in Alameda County remains below 5%, we may have the basis for suspending that testing program for that group of employees, for the exempted group. If we do that, we would shift from an on-site regular testing ability to an off-site as-needed testing ability with another contractor. So we will always have the ability to have our employees have a place for them to test if they're trying to stay at work and avoid quarantine, if they're trying to get back to work quickly, if they've had it, or if they just want peace of mind. We will have an as-needed off-site testing service available. So we're trying to make sure we have a kind of a continuity of service as we move forward. And that's all I have.
And you'll post that for board members to take advantage of as well?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Dave. That's it for my reports.
I would just say on that, I think I was looking for it, but I got an alert, seems like while I was here, just a news alert saying that, you know, by now, most Americans have had COVID. Yeah, 60%, I think that was the number I saw. And the fact that with 2,000 or so employees, we've had 470 tested positive is closer to 25%, and I think that's just a real, you know, thank you. I think it's something to be proud of here.
So that's correct. About 25% of our employees have tested positive, but those are just the ones we know about.
Right, of course, but so is the 60%. That number.
You must be a
60%
statistician.
is nationwide and isn't necessarily, I mean.
I think we're doing better than average significantly, and I think it's a testament to our employees' efforts to stay safe and to the protocols that we've adopted. So, thank you. All right, we are on to committee reports and director comments. We'll now receive a report from the March 22nd UMRWA board meeting, the April 14th FRWA meeting, and this morning's Sustainability, Energy, and Finance Administration Committee meetings. Director Coleman, I'll let you have your way.
All right, first I'll do with UMRWA. We met last Friday. We met for actually over 2 hours. We had presentations on forest management, Blue Forest finance presentation. We're going to get more information back on that, as well as our project report on forestry projects and our IRWM grant application. So we're getting a lot more information coming back for a meeting. I think it's on July 22nd, if I'm not mistaken, at that point in time. For our Los Vaqueros Joint Powers meeting, we met on April 13th. We dealt with just how to operate in terms of claims, procedures, and actions. It was more procedural that we dealt with, and WIFIA funding and things of that nature. And then the Freeport meeting, I guess that was the same week. I don't even know now. They all blended together. We met and we're putting together the budget for adoption at the next meeting.
We adopted
Oh, we did adopt the budget. I'm sorry.
the Freeport meeting, and let me just say, unbeknownst to me, I chaired the meeting, so that's why I'm up on this. We did approve the 23 budget in the amount of $5,873,822, and that's for the operation and maintenance of the Freeport Regional Water Project facilities. It includes the contingency line item amount of $2,856,940 that is authorized if additional dry year supply is needed from EBMUD or Sacramento from FRWA. And it's detailed in the table in the report. I think the important part about it, and my main concern, is how operationally strong we are. And I'm very pleased to report that it doesn't matter which operational team is running the program, the staff is on top of it. David Briggs does a great job up there of keeping us informed and in tune. And that equipment is honed and ready to go. So you don't have to worry about its ability. And rest assured that I'm always pounding the table to make sure that we are operational and that we have addressed everything from turbines to you name it, fish screen protection, everything. We're in A1 shape. I want to make sure you understand that it is a very important operation. This is the time that we need all the standbys to make sure we deliver for the people we represent. We have that ability, and if we work closely together, we can get there, and we will get there. Finally, I wanted to say about Freeport, the other important thing we did was to recognize a young man, Mr. Williams, who did a great job, passed away. There was a resolution passed in his honor. I think that's the significant part I want to bring to you from Freeport. If it's time, I'll go right into finance and wipe it off the map as well. This morning, the Finance Committee met, and there were 5 items on the agenda. You've already acted on an essential piece of it in the passage of the item 8 on the consent calendar. The Customer Assistance Program, we've already talked about that, and its funding, and we're well on the way to helping them and to approving those vestiges that can bring revenue to the table to support the program that are not derived from any funding from water or wastewater programs. The investment transactions were clear. The quarterly financial report, March 31, 22, and the payroll disbursement all went through smoothly. Water and wastewater system revenue bonds, that's the item you approved. And the fiscal year 22 semi-annual budget performance report was given to us. And we're in good standing. You heard about some of that earlier, but in every category, we're measurably there, either a little bit ahead or sometimes a little bit under with the expense. That's my report. And back to you, Mr. President.
All right, thank you, Bill.
I will do
Marguerite?
sustainability and energy. We met this morning and heard 3 reports. 2 were related to transition to green and renewable transportation. The first one was about a pilot project that we've been doing at the wastewater treatment plant to make EV charging stations available to employees where they reimburse or pay the district for the use of those chargers, and the district's energy that's being created at our resource recovery program is the source of the energy. So it's a nice little virtuous circle. We actually have ended up doing better than it's been a money. Hey, I guess actually could go to funding the CAP program. It's a non-ratepayer source of revenue, small though it is at present, but and the recommendation is to, continue that program and look for opportunities to expand it. The second report was on more of our fleet transition to clean energy and reduce our emissions from vehicles, and looked at the availability of EVs in all EV and renewable fuel vehicles in all vehicle classes. And as most people know, it's harder to find an excavator that's electric than it is a battery electric vehicle, light duty vehicle, but there's progress being made in that. And then the thing I learned about was renewable gasoline, which I don't know, I'm a little skeptical, but I want to learn more about it. And then finally, we had a brief but full report on our integrated pest management program that highlighted our efforts to reduce the use of pesticides, including Roundup or glyphosate, glycophosphate, or I'm always going to get that wrong. Whatever, Roundup, and that was it.
All right, thank you. Thank you for those reports, everyone. Other items for future consideration, please submit to the general manager. Any other additional director comments?
I have a comment.
Okay, Bill.
I wanted to report to the board, and Mr. President, this is in your unit also. I visited McClymonds High School on invitation from the principal and had a chance to address the persons who escorted the 29 youngsters to our wastewater plant and had a tour. I thought that was very significant because youngsters don't get inside of factories or any kind of heavy equipment operational units, and they don't get a whisper that the pictures and things that they say at the school is not the same as hands-on, and that was very exciting for them. So I wanted to make sure you knew that on his invitation I came. I also learned something about some of the problems at the school, and I made sure that they got their interns turned in on time for our program, because if you're not in early, the other schools go ahead of you. So I gave him that advice, and I wanted you to know, Mr. President, that that was my intention in going over. There are a lot of other issues concerning McClymonds, but those will come out as the EPA is moving into that sector. You need to know that they're looking at everything around there. They're down around 14th and Adeline now and moving north. So all of that will be encumbered in what they're going through with the plan, where it is, and how it affects the neighborhood. That's part of the environmental justice actions that are taking place all across the country. And this is Oakland's fell swoop. The last thing I called to your attention, I met with San Francisco Roxy Theater persons, and they had the Black Panther Esquire movie, which is being in the classical realm preview, and it exhibits the Black Panthers not as a group that we normally think of them. The highlight of the film was on the trial of Huey Newton, and I am in that film, and I was invited as a special guest they provided tickets and transportation for me over to San Francisco. And I wanted to say it's an excellent film. I was glad to see myself up there walking around with the people. And because many of the Black Panthers were kids at the recreation center when I was director in West Oakland, it was the site of the breakfast program. And it emphasizes how they plan to defend the areas that they were pushed into and keep the oppression out. They didn't need the police to police them. They were policing themselves and making sure the community survived. And much of that helped defer the death of many young people during that time. The final emphasis is that the selection of the jury, the kinds of things that they were given to do from the judge, and their carrying that out led to Newton being exonerated from the, or at least found not guilty. And the key thing was that if you get the right jury, and if it's made up of your communities and has representation in it, you can come out with verdicts that are fair. And that's what it exhibited. And hopefully, by focusing on that and not the whole aspects of Panthers, this might give it a chance to win an award. So that's my report.
Thank you, Bill. John?
I just have something real quick. In the Chronicle today, there's a story done about atmospheric rivers and climate change and how things are really going to change in the Northern California, Greater Bay Area with more intense rain and potentially. So when we look at doing water supply, can we look at the various studies that are being done, whether by NOAA or whomever, because it's not it may determine we need to change our operation and how we operate our system going into the future with climate change and relying less on snow, more on intense rain, and then being able to collect and move it around our system and storing it.
We can do that.
Thank you.
All right. Within that, our next regular meeting of the board will be held on Tuesday, May 10th, 2022 at 1:15. This meeting is now adjourned.